we're now ready to start looking at our major key 1-4-5 chord progression in arpeggios. Now I've decided to split this one into two sessions because there's quite a lot of information to take on board, in the course of which though we will learn some basic principles which will enable us to move through the remaining chord progressions rather more quickly. So right now we're going to begin with the open position arpeggios. Now as I said in the last video, I'm not going to have time or opportunity in this series to go through all the fingerings for all the open position arpeggios. Instead I'm going to start you off by going through one key in some depth, and you'll then have an example which you can follow in working out the arpeggios for all the other progressions. Now remember, with the 1-4-5 progression, if we go through the keys following the cycle of fifths, then each new key will contain two familiar chords plus one new chord. So this makes a nice incremental way of building your arpeggio repertoire while at the same time continually reinforcing what you've already learnt. And not surprisingly, we're going to begin with the key of C. And this is quite a handy place to start. If we examine the open position chord shapes for our 1-4-5 progression, that is C, F and G, we can see on the C chord in the middle four strings we have the notes C, E, G and C. That's the chord tones root, third, fifth and octave, in exactly the sequence that they appear in the C major scale. In other words, this is C major triad arpeggio. Likewise, if we look at the start of the G chord, we have the notes G, B, D and G. That's root, 3, 5 and octave. And there is our G major triad arpeggio. Now when it comes to the F chord, the situation is slightly different. If we look at the first notes of the F chord, we have F, C, F, that's root, fifth and octave, which is a little less helpful to us. But if we look at this chord on the top four strings, we will find F here, then A, C, F. That's root, third, fifth, octave, and there is our F major triad arpeggio. So uniquely in the key of C, we can play the whole 1-4-5 progression in triad arpeggios using essentially the same fingering that we use to play the chords. That's C, F and G. However, note that we also have a low F here on the 6th string and a high G here on the 1st string. This means that for the F chord and the G chord we have a full 2-octave arpeggio available to us. Here's the F and the G. Now in general, for each of the first 5 notes in the open position, that's the open E through to G sharp or A flat, we have 2 full octaves within reach in the open position. For the remaining notes, that's where the lowest occurrence on the guitar is on the 5th or the 4th string, we can only play 1 full octave arpeggio in this position. But do be aware that you have partial arpeggios available to you above and below. So for example, if we look at the C, here's our C major arpeggio of C, E, G and C, and then on the top string we have another E and another G, and on the bottom string we have another G and another E, which can be incorporated into melody lines played over the C chord in the open position. For practicing arpeggios though, I prefer to keep things simple by sticking to arpeggios played over 1 full octave. This means that where there is a 2-octave arpeggio available to us, we split it in half and make it into two separate exercises. So let's clarify this with reference to the 1-4-5 progression in C major. We start with our 1-octave arpeggio of C major on the middle 4 strings, and then to play the F major arpeggio in the lower octave we start with our first finger, 1st fret, string 6, then the open A string, C at fret 3 on string 5, and the octave F at fret 3 on string 4. And for our G chord we can play the arpeggio in the lower octave simply by using the fingering of the chord. That's the G at fret 3 on string 6, the B at fret 2 on string 5, and then the open D and G strings, strings 4 and 3. And when we start to play these arpeggios as a sequence, we straight away run into some fingering issues. In the open position, our ground rule is that there should be a 1-to-1 match between the fingers and the frets, so that finger 1 always plays fret 1, finger 2 always plays fret 2, finger 3 always plays fret 3, finger 4 fret 4. But when we start to play round the sequence of arpeggios, we run into situations where the same finger is needed to play consecutive notes on different strings. So the way round this problem is very simple. We just break the rule. So beginning with this C arpeggio in the ascending form, so we go the notes bottom to top. To get to the F arpeggio, this first finger now needs to move 4 whole strings down to string 6, which is quite a jump. What we can do is use finger 2 to play the octave C. And then finger 1 is free to come down to play the F. Now in the F arpeggio we now have 2 consecutive notes at fret 3, and if we're going to move on to play the G arpeggio, the root of the G is also on the same fret, so we have 3 consecutive notes on 1 fret. Now for some people it's possible to do this with just a rolling movement of the 3rd finger. If you're not one of these people, then we can bring the 4th finger into play to play the octave F, and that frees up the 3rd finger in anticipation of moving down to the G. Now we can play the arpeggio sequence in one flowing movement with no jumps of strings. And back to C. So now, having practiced this sequence with the F and G arpeggios in the lower octave, we can now practice with these arpeggios in the upper octave. So once again we start with the C in the same position, as that's the only full octave arpeggio available to us. And then we move to the F arpeggio with the 3rd finger, fret 3, string 4. Our A is then 2nd finger, 2nd fret, string 3. And then our C and F on strings 2 and 1 on fret 1. And again we can play this with a little bar of the 1st finger, or if you find that tricky, bring in the 2nd finger to play the octave F. Our G arpeggio in the upper octave will begin with the open G string, and then we have a choice. Our next note is B, the 3rd of the chord of G, and we have a B on this open string here, or we have a B on the 4th fret on the G string. And the choice is really yours. My personal preference is to use the fretted note. 2 reasons. One, even if you're playing in the open position, a fretted note gives you more control over dynamics and expression in the note. And perhaps more importantly, this little finger is the one that needs the most exercise, so any opportunity you find to give it some work to do is worth taking. So for the rest of the G we have a D at fret 3 on string 2, and the octave G, fret 3 on string 1. Once again, you can play these with a mini bar using the third finger, or you can bring the fourth finger in to play the octave G, and this has the additional benefit of freeing up this third finger ready to move back to the C to repeat the cycle. And so on. Now once we're familiar with the arpeggio sequence in ascending arpeggios, we can play the same sequence using the arpeggios in a descending pattern. Now for most people, including me, this proves a little bit trickier, so persist at it and eventually it'll come. C, F, G, and back to C. And the same thing with the F and G arpeggios in the upper octave. Of course, you can always add some variety by playing some of these exercises using the F chord in the lower octave and the G chord in the upper octave, or vice versa. And the final variant of this exercise is to play the series of arpeggios, playing each arpeggio from bottom to top and back down again. Now this introduces another slight problem, because now for each arpeggio we have a sequence of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notes. If we play this in a continuous pattern, we get the effect of 7 beats to the bar, or to use the technical term, a time signature of 7/4 or 7/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. To which you may say, so what? Myself, I grew up in the era of prog rock, so odd-numbered time signatures hold no terrors for me. Nevertheless, it does introduce some complications to the picking, and you may just not want to bother your head with fancy time signatures when you're supposed to be concentrating your attention on arpeggios. So there are a couple of things we can do about this. One is to double the octave, so we play. This has the effect of making each arpeggio a group of 8 notes, which brings the count nicely back into patterns of 4, our very conventional 4/4 time signature. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. However, what I prefer to do is to miss out the final root of each arpeggio and instead move on to the next arpeggio on that beat. This means playing This has the effect of putting the notes into patterns of 6, which you can think of in your head as perhaps a waltz in 3/4. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Or as a jig in 6/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This not only puts the whole sequence in a more comfortable time signature, it also makes a nice flowing pattern as you move from one arpeggio to the next. Well, we're going to break it there. In the next video we'll move out of the open position and look at this same chord progression in transposable fingerings, which can be moved to anywhere on the fretboard. So please join me then.